Woohoo! Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Welcome to the Arise podcast with Danielle Castillejo and Maggie Hemphill. Conversations around faith, justice, gender, race, and the church.
Yeah, Maggie, thank you so much for introducing us. And today, my name is Danielle, and today we have a special guest with us from Georgia. And Maggie and I happen to be in the same town, but we are practicing social distancing in our separate homes. Our guest is Amy Taylor. Her resume includes that she's a NICU nurse. She is a critical care nurse. She's a partner, a writer. She is a lover of people and of animals, adventure, and the wildlife. Amy and I met almost a year ago at an event, and we've stayed in close contact since. And so Maggie and I started having this conversation around the coronavirus, and I don't know, a few weeks ago, Maggie?
Yeah, it's been ongoing.
Yeah, and then about that same time, Amy and I connected, and as Maggie and I were saying, like, is this really such a big deal? I reached out to Amy, and Amy and I kind of like connected, and I was like, dude, I can't find toilet paper. We had a good laugh across the country, but things have turned far more serious, and I just thought it would be great to have Amy with us today. So thank you for being with us, Amy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, could you just say a little bit more, like what you do, where you're from, and just launch into your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm from Georgia, have born and raised here, and then I became a nurse about 6 years ago. I started out on just in pediatrics, and then I went to what is the pediatric ICU. So that's anything from 0 days old to 18 years old, and recently moved to doing just straight NICU. And the PICU is a kind of a crazy place. The PICU here is one of the largest in the Southeast. It has 56 beds, which is quite large. And so you see a lot of different stuff, a lot of hard stuff. So it's really nice to just now kind of be with the little babies that just need to kind of grow.
Yeah. And so tell me about like what the process was. Like, when did you first hear the coronavirus, and then how did information start unfolding to you in your world?
I think honestly from you first, because you obviously hear it from the media, and it was in Italy and China and all that kind of stuff. But I'm an American, so I think I am above everything, and it's not going to come to me. And then you're like, there's no toilet paper, and that's crazy. And so even when it started happening here, I was one of those people. I think as a nurse, you're kind of inclined, if you're not like bleeding out, you're fine. So it's all fine. It's not a big deal. It's going to pass. This is like snow where everybody makes a big deal and then nothing happens. And within a span of several days, it turned really bad really quickly. So it's just been a very escalating process with each day. And I think our response to it has been very harmful to healthcare workers.
Yeah, I agree. The escalation happened quickly. And actually, Danielle and I had been tapping back and forth, texting back and forth about this Twitter where it shows Trump and his responses over starting from January into March and downplaying. And then all of a sudden it's like, it's like a huge crisis. What did it look like for you when it turned really, really bad? Like, so you had said it seemed like there was nothing going on, and then all of a sudden it was bad. Describe what bad looked like.
So for us in the hospital, it went from we were at the front of the door. You weren't allowed to let anybody in. Like if a mom came in labor, she was allowed to have one person with her, where normally whoever could come in, and that one person had to be fever free. So you had to take their temperature each time they walked into the hospital. If they walked out to their car, you have to retake their temperature when they come back in. And so our side is kind of like the women's side. So you have the NICU, you have labor and delivery on one side, and then you have the hospital part on the other side, like the adult side. And for them, they started screening people outside. So they're not even allowed in the hospital. So big tents set up everywhere. It looks like something from a third world country where you think this isn't happening here. So very quickly overnight, tents are going up everywhere, looking like it's going to be really bad.
Yeah, and how has it been for supplies for your hospital? You know, one of the things I've been hearing is along with the shortages of toilet paper and cleaning supplies, like hospitals aren't even able to get all of the protective equipment they need. Like, have you seen that in your hospital, and what does the supply chain look like where you are?
Yeah. For us, because we're on the NICU side, we're not really wearing that protective wear. But all my friends who work on the adult side at the old pediatric hospital I worked at, within, I think, a couple of days of Trump actually saying, oh, this is bad, like this is a state of emergency, they had a patient with tuberculosis, which is, so there's a couple things that are airborne. So when a virus is airborne, it means it's just sitting in the air. So you breathe and then you walk off, and that's still sitting in the air for 3 hours afterwards. And so when that's the case, you're supposed to be in a negative pressure room so that air isn't getting blown out into that HVAC system or into everybody else in the hallway. And so there was a patient that had tuberculosis, and they had no mask for this one. Like, the nurses didn't have any mask, and it hadn't even started. So it was healthcare workers stealing them. It was people like hoarding them, and then management started hoarding them. So they're supposed to be a one-time use. You use them, you throw them away. So each time you enter that room, and now it's being that you have one mask, an N95 mask, and you get that for a day. So you mark on it and you put it in your bag, and that's all you get for the whole day. They're running out of gowns, which are not reusable, and now they're being used for the whole day. So protective wear is meant to protect typically the provider and also the patient. So if you have two patients, you're not carrying it over to that patient in the next room. So, I mean, you're going to get viruses that are interswapping, which makes it obviously more difficult if one person has a virus and now you have 3 viruses that you're trying to fight at the same time.
Yeah, I felt like a pit in my stomach when you described that this hadn't even started and you were already short on supplies. Like, you didn't have what you needed for the tuberculosis patient.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really scary sorry, go ahead.
No, I have the chills thinking about that.
Yeah, I think it's really scary because not only are you trying to manage your anxiety as a just person, you know, with your own family and getting supplies, you know, like food and toilet paper and things like that, but you're also trying now to manage the anxieties of the patients and their family. And now you're worried about, not only are you transferring it to your other patient that you're caring for, but now you're going to talk about bringing it home. So it's a really scary thing, and it just shouldn't happen. Like, we are a first world country, and this should not be happening. If you look at the protective wear of other countries, you're like, oh, that makes sense. They've got these big hoods on, and they've got the full protective gear on. And we're over here, and the CDC is saying, hey, it used to be that you need to have an N95, but if you don't have one, you can just wear a bandana or a scarf. Like, that's crazy. Like, that doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah, what is the climate? Oh, go ahead, Danielle.
No, sorry. Go for it.
I was just gonna say, what's the climate among your coworkers? So, like, as supplies are limited, and you guys are, and you know, the CDC is trying to make it more doable to continue to offer healthcare, even though it's at your own personal risk. Like, what is the climate among your coworkers? And you had mentioned, like, even some staff hoarding. Like, talk to me about what it's like with the people that you work with.
I think there's the sense of deprivation and just fear. And so that fear looks different for everybody. You know, that fear looks like snapping at other people. It looks like, I think the most often thing you see in nurses is just, I don't know if unempathy is a word, but lack of empathy towards others. And so just kind of a crassness and a very, well, you didn't do this, so this isn't going to happen. And so just a low morale. There are people who are just very angry, and then there's people that are very tearful that they are terrified of bringing it. Most people have little ones and terrified of bringing it home to their children.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. And I think in the rush to do things, like people have said, well, I'm going to sew a mask. And so I asked you about that. Can we sew protective gear for you? And what was your answer to me?
Yeah, it actually, I mean, it's super kind that people are willing to do that with their own time. But the NCBI actually did a small study on this recently that said it's not actually effective. I would say if you have like an N95 that you went out and bought originally, donate it to the hospital and make your own self a mask that you can wear out to public, because they're not very effective. And they're actually showing, studies are showing that healthcare workers that are exposed to this virus are getting sicker than other people. So it seems like there is some sort of cumulative effect to being exposed to it over time.
That's terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is terrifying. And so how does the hospital keep like a negative pressure air balance between, for instance, like the NICU and then the other area of the hospital where they're dealing with these patients? I don't understand. Can you just explain it?
Sure. So typically most hospitals don't have many, because you think TB is pretty much eradicated. Chickenpox is the other thing, is pretty much eradicated. So you're talking, like I know in the children's hospital I worked at, I think there was maybe, let's just say 5 to 10, somewhere in there. So as far as like our NICU goes, like I said, it's a completely separate building. But as far as on the adult side, I have no clue, because if one patient on one floor has it, that's not in ICU, I don't know. I guess potentially it could be spread to the ICU.
Yeah, the idea that it's lingering in the air and then the HVAC system goes on like that feels really scary, because
Yeah.
you have it also increases your anxiety. Like, is this a place where it's being pumped in through the air system? So like then it increases how much more fear someone would feel coming into the hospital. Have you experienced any like unruliness among patients, or like has it been just like more cases? Like, talk to me about the level of people coming in and what their not physical temperature, but like what the morale is like.
Yeah, I think initially people just wanted to know, which is perfectly valid. So you had a lot of ERs being flooded with people showing up and being like, oh, I have a fever, or I have a runny nose, can I get tested? And we are still not at the capacity to test patients. Like, we do not have a capacity to test even people that are in the hospital. A lot of times, if you are not critically ill, they're not going to be testing you, which is kind of a sidebar, but crazy note when you have people like Harvey Weinstein that are being tested and healthcare workers aren't allowed to even be tested. That's a big difference I see in other countries, is that initially they quarantined and they tested everybody, and then they followed that trail. Oh, you were infected. Where did you go this day? And they followed the trail downward. So the ERs initially were being inundated with people that wanted to be tested, but if you would not normally go to the ER for an issue, you should not be going to the ER, because you're risking being exposed to more things by going there than, and it's hard because you want to know, like, if I am infected, I want to not be passing it on to my spouse and to my kids, but we're just not there with the testing.
I think it's hard to know what to believe. I believe you, and I'm behind you, and the commentary you have is so important and vital. And then you hear our public health officials say, there's tests. And I've seen on our Facebook page, like someone said, yo, I was texted a week ago and I haven't heard back. And then I read that even the tests that have been performed have been prioritized. Like, which tests are they actually processing? And just to kind of try to fathom that in a large area, metropolitan area where you live, that even if you're critically ill, you might not be able to get a test.
Sorry, I might have said that wrong. If you're critically ill, they're going to test you, but otherwise they're not, probably.
Yeah.
Like my brother-in-law is a internist physician, and he got a call sometimes last week saying, hey, we can send you some tests. And there was a number he asked for. It wasn't very many, and they're giving a kind of a set number of how many you're allowed to ask for. So if you usually, about a week ago, if you walked into your doctor and you said, hey, I'm really sick, I think I might have this, it was up to him to contact the CDC to find out if you could be tested, and then it was up to the CDC. And now they're giving physicians the opportunity to say, hey, if you think this person needs to be tested. But even, it's so different from hospital how this being handled. Like I have a friend that is an ICU nurse down in Florida, and she took care of a patient for 5 days, and she was working with other nurses that were having nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, that were still being required to work, and found out after that 5 days of caring for this patient that he had the virus. And then they went ahead and tested her at that point, but she still had to work her 3 shifts before she was allowed to, actually get the results for it. So, there is a huge disparity and a fear, I think, from hospitals of what are we going to do when these, all these nurses show up with this virus. And I think that's part of the reason they don't want to test, because it's kind of like the CDC. It's like, oh, initially it's airborne, you need an N95 mask. Oh, shoot, we don't have enough N95 masks. So now we're going to move it to droplet, and you can just wear a regular surgical mask. And it's like the guidelines change based on what resources are available.
That's unreal.
Yeah.
Like it's unreal. It's unsafe. It's unethical. And yeah, I mean, it's like warfare and being sent into battle without the equipment that you need. And then the soldiers on the front line die first.
Yeah. Because then what are you going to do? Like, what's your solution then? There's a thing called travel nursing. So you get paid a significant amount of money more. Typically for nurses, it's during respiratory season because there's really high needs and demands, and the units are really busy. And I got a job offer recently to come to Washington, ground zeros, that I would be making in 13 weeks more than what I would make in 13 weeks, I would make more than I would make in a year. So it's a lot of money, but still there's probably not enough staff to actually staff a lot of these places. Grady, our number one trauma hospital here in Atlanta, serves a lot of low income, no insurance, and recently 9 of their physicians came down with corona, and that's really difficult because most of them were ICU physicians, and I don't know how many ICU physicians they actually have, but I would typically say there's somewhere between 10 and 15. So then you've got doctors and nurses working many shifts in a row, which just has been proven that is not safe.
Wow. I'm just like, I'm taking in sort of the horror, the picture that you're painting for us. And that, like, I feel that in my body, like I feel sick.
Yeah. The one thing I would want to say to people is that there's this idea of a 6-foot rule. And it means that if I'm 6 feet from you, then I'm safe. And lots of people are, quote unquote, practicing social distancing by it and thinking like they're in their neighborhood and they're all gathered around in their chairs, and because they're 6 feet from each other, that is safe. And that makes sense because I don't know where that information came from, but it is definitely out there. And an ICU pulmonologist said, who's a lung doctor, said that reality is we just don't know. We don't know how safe it is to be 6 feet from each other. So just don't do it. Like, it's not worth your health. And there's also this idea that if you're young, you don't get it and it doesn't affect you. And that is just proving to not be true either. I think it is likely that from the stuff I've read that young people get it when young people do get it, that they do recover typically, but you don't know. Like, you just don't know. You could have an underlying condition that you're not aware about, and the problem becomes that there's just not enough resources. There's not enough PPE. There's not enough ventilators. You know, some hospitals are already using ventilators for 2 people, which is kind of an unheard of thing. So a ventilator is when you're having trouble breathing on your own, there's a tube that's stuck down your throat and it helps you breathe. And you're supposed to use 1 ventilator per person. And the first time I heard about it was the mass shooting in, I think, Texas a couple years ago, and an ER physician used it because they just didn't have enough ventilators when all that happened. And you know, the way that this should be happening is that everything should be shutting down and saying, oh, you guys can make ventilators like this company, you make them, and this, you make plastic over here, you guys can make the gowns. Like, everything should be shutting down to go towards these efforts. And if you overreact, great, we overreacted, you have it on standby for next time. But I feel like the response has been, it's not that bad, it's not that bad. Oh my gosh, it's bad, it's bad. But we're not doing anything about it. We're just like bracing for it's bad.
Yeah, can you go back to and just describe to me a little bit of what we talked about, like with the ventilator and the intubation? I think you said something to me like 1 or 2, if you have to intubate 1 or 2 patients in a day, that's like you described as a really rough day, right?
Yeah. Depending on how large your unit is, you're not intubating many patients. Like, there are many modes of oxygen that you can use before that, just a regular nasal cannula, which you see on every medical show. There's something called high flow, which is a step up. And then you have like BiPAP, which is like similar to what some people wear as a CPAP to go to sleep. And then the next step after that is intubation. That's where you're going to be sedated. You're possibly going to be paralyzed. The other issue becomes, like, these people are not just sick, they're like sick. So anything from 21% to 100% is your oxygen modality, right? So if you're on 50%, you're not doing well, like, you're struggling. If you're on 100%, like, you're getting to the max of what we could possibly do for you other than drugs. And a lot of these patients, even young ones, they're seeing where you have to do prone, which means you put them on their belly. And that's a lot of work, you know, for anybody to prone a patient. So if you're talking about a typical ICU is 26 patients and you're having to prone every single one of them that are intubated, like, that is a very difficult day. And a lot of anesthesiologists are saying they're in a regular shift. I think it was in New York I was reading that said the other night she had intubated almost 56 patients, which I don't even know what that looks like because I don't know how large their ICU is, but a 50-bed ICU is very, very large. That's not common. In most places, so if you have, say, 56 beds, let's just say, you don't have that many ventilators. You might have 30, let's say. So if you're already running out of ventilators and we haven't even hit our peak, if you look at the number correlation, we are already surpassing Italy, which is really interesting because we're not actually testing everybody. So I don't know if it was the same in Italy, that they didn't have the test and they weren't testing as many people, but we're already surpassing them, and our numbers are way high, not way higher, but they're significantly higher, and we're still not even testing everybody. So for me, that's very alarming.
Yeah, what do you think the threshold, like when will it be that it cannot be done anymore? Because I mean, you guys are making do, you're letting, you know, guidelines slip, as it were, for health safety. Like, ultimately at some point it's going to be it. And you had mentioned that you guys had tents outside your hospital and people were being screened before they came in. Like, what is the last straw, as it were? Like, what would be the final blow, as it were?
I think that you become to this place where you're operating in a war mindset. So you're assessing, oh, this person is older, they have multiple what you would call comorbidities, so they have diabetes, or they have they were a cancer survivor or something like that, that makes them less likely to survive. So you say, well, we only have this many ventilators, but this person's a 26-year-old female who has no known conditions, so we're going to choose to intubate her and put her on the ventilator. And Italy has said that that has happened, where they have had to do that, where they are deciding that who to essentially give care to and who they can't afford to give care to, which is really terrifying, because if most people haven't heard people gasp for breath as they die, but it's a really awful process. And not only that, but people are doing this alone. You know, you have to think that these people aren't allowed to have visitors. They're not allowed to have anybody with them at the bedside as they are sick. And so it's just very isolating when you do get it. You're, you know, depending on how the hospital is operating yet, are they still using the hospital beds? Are they operating out of the parking garage now, as some of them are? But you get to this place where it's kind of like this war mentality, that you're only treating those who you think will survive.
It's like an unheard of amount of responsibility on you and others in your field. You're carrying the weight of the negligence of society.
Yeah, I saw something the other night that a guy posted about comparing it to Chernobyl, which I found really, really fascinating. That essentially when Chernobyl happened, they were like, it's fine, everything's fine, just put this protective gear on, it's fine. And you're sending the frontline people into harm's way and telling them it's safe, when research has shown it is not safe, which I think bodes to that, how valuable do you find these people to be? And, you know, they're already showing that many nurses and physicians in Italy are having PTSD symptoms. They're having trouble coming to work. Like, this is all very traumatizing. Like, as a nurse, to not be able to care well for you, which means to like connect to you, to actually see you as a person, that has been some of my most defeating moments as a nurse. And you just can't. You do not have the margin in this type of space. You're just surviving. And that sucks for everybody involved. That sucks for the patient. That sucks for you, because everyone deserves dignity and care, no matter what issues they have, no matter where they're coming from, their socioeconomic status. Everyone deserves that level of care.
Yeah, I think ultimately the whole world is going to have PTSD. I mean, I'm serious. We are in a global time of trauma. Like, we are collectively being traumatized by fear and anxiety and uncertainty. And it's playing out all over the place. I mean, one of the things that has sort of kind of, been rumbling around in my mind is, like, at some level, like, looting, I feel like, is going to start when people get desperate enough for toilet paper or whatever it is, and all the stores are limited and the staff is, limited. Like, ultimately, this is like when society starts to break down. And I'm not saying that's for sure going to happen, but like, it makes me think about, like, long term, the impacts of what we're experiencing now, not just like emotionally, but financially, like the global economy. And it feels like no one is going untouched.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if this was your experience, but I remember when it first kind of started getting to be like, oh, this is kind of a big deal. And I went to Costco and people are like running through the stores. They have masks on. They're like shoving people. I'm like, maybe I should be panicking. Like, maybe and then I come home and I'm like, oh God, this is really bad. And I start freaking out and I start panicking. Like, you see that panic in others and it just breeds it, And so I think it's like, if you go into a store and you don't know you need red tennis shoes, but everybody is buying these red tennis shoes, like, maybe I need them. So you start panicking and you buy them, and that's just what's happened, is everybody buys, like Danielle was saying, pinto beans, like, isn't that what you were getting? Yeah, pinto beans.
Yeah, dry pinto beans. They're never
Like
sold out.
nobody buys those, but now everybody, like one person bought them and it's like, oh, we should probably get those. It's a staple, you know? And so it does breed this like deprivation and this fear of, oh, if that person's looting, well, I should probably be looting too. Like they have stuff that I don't have. And yeah, it's scary, I think, because it just breeds and it festers.
Yeah, and I'm stuck back, you know, in this idea of deprivation and of fear. And there's so much fear, I think, in our society of losing position, of losing power, of losing money. And so we can't shut down these businesses, and they can't move towards making the goods and the ventilators and the masks and the things that we properly need to take care of our healthcare workers. But who's thought, like, I'm thinking, like, who of us has thought, like, okay, so we're not going to provide the masks. We're going to gas out. We're going to run into the ground our healthcare workers. Let's say we make it out, but we run these people into the ground. We exhaust them. They retire. They don't survive for mentally or emotionally or physically or spiritually or whatever. Like we run them out of their business. Yeah. And then who's going to want to enter next? Like, do I want my kid to become a nurse after I see how you've been treated? I'm going to be like, hell no. And I just swore because that's how I feel. And I'm just like, so we can't sacrifice to make masks for the people that are literally going to save our lives. And we can't think far enough in advance to think, well, where are they going to be? If this blows over, when it blows over, where are these people going to be? And I think I just feel anger and frustration about that. Yeah. We can get more toilet paper.
Yeah. You can always get a bidet, you know, it's fine.
Yeah.
Well, Conan O'Brien said we can all just use CVS receipts because they're so long.
It's truth, though.
No, but I'm serious.
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought about it as the after of what that would look like. That's really an interesting thought, Danielle.
Yeah, I don't like that thought, and I don't like the thought that I have friends like you that are nurses and friends of yours and people that I know in my own community that are in this work, and they got into it for reasons that are good reasons.
Yeah. To
care for others, to do good in the world because they love people, they love medicine, and to think that our system is going to use them up. Just kind of like suck it out of them.
Yeah.
Because we can't afford to buy them proper masks.
Yeah, and I will say there are companies like Home Depot, Harbor Freight, Lowe's. They have stopped, like whatever their stock is, they've taken and they've sent them to hospitals and stuff like that. So there is goodness there, and there are people that are saying, hey, this is not right. Like we can do our part, and I think that's all you can do. Like, what is your part in this? Because like you said, Maggie, being like, oh my God, I just walked in the store and someone could have been breathing this air 3 hours ago and now I'm breathing it and now I have it, you know, like it's real, but that's not helpful, you know? So like, what can you do? Like you can stay home, and that is a big deal, you know, like people are not staying home. Like our churches are not shutting down. You know, I saw this video the other day where I don't know, it looked like a large church. And the guy was saying, you know, if God is for you, who can be against you? You know, we are not going to be tempted by fear. And so he had everyone go and like shake everyone's hand in the congregation. So they're all just shaking each other's hands. And I'm like having a panic attack. I'm like, this is so stupid. But like, leave it to Christians to come up with some crazy thing that we are somehow immune to science, you know, because I don't know how y'all grew up, but like that is my like culture, that you're immune to science. Like God's going to protect you. Let's just stick our head in the sand and hope for the best and pray about it and we'll get through it, you know. And it's Christians that are going out. It's Christians that are still having church services and still having Bible studies. And it's like, stop it. Stop doing this. Like it's not about you. And I feel like in America, there's this culture that is not about community, and we don't really care about our neighbor for the most part. And you think, oh, I'm young and I might not get it. Yeah, but when you go to that store and that person then touches it, you know, that's a big deal. Like, protect your neighbor by not going and handing it to 30 different people, because 30 turns into 1,000 really quickly.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good reminder. And I think ultimately our lawmakers will eventually get us to shelter in place everywhere. I mean, right now, I think it's just 3 states that have done it. And there's been significant places that have limited exposure, but you're right. Like, people just need to stay home. And the best way to love your neighbor is to not see them right now. Like, that is how you honor and care for them in this time. And while that has not always been the case, and it won't always be the case in the future either, but right now, that's how we can do it.
Yeah. And to the people wearing gloves, let me just tell you something. Gloves are great, okay? They are completely pointless if you wear them all day long. You use them to touch your phone, and then you get to your house and you take them off with your mouth, which I saw the other day. Like, gloves can be helpful, but think about why you're using the gloves. Like, if you're using the gloves to be like, hey, don't touch your mouth. Like, I'm not going to touch my face. If I obviously have gloves on, great. But be aware of why you're doing what you're doing. You know, like, don't just wear gloves because you think you're protecting yourself, or people are putting trash bags on their feet. It's like, great, put them on your feet, take them off before you go into your house.
So
That's good.
what can we do? What can we do? Like, I'm not wearing gloves, but what can we do, Amy?
That's a great question. I think staying inside is the most beneficial thing because, you know, we're not under government mandate. You know, I think my opinion on why China slowed their disease process is that they do what they're told. So when they're told to stay inside, they do. You know, unfortunately, it's because they have a really crappy government, but they don't go outside when they're told not to go outside. And Americans are like, I'm not supposed to go outside. All of a sudden, I want to have all these friends. So let's go outside and let's hang out together. You know, so think about what you're doing. And it's hard. Like, it is hard to sit inside. It's hard to, like, struggle and deal with, like, anxiety and depression and all of those things. But stay inside. Like, pay attention to your neighbor. Like, send them a message asking. I think there's a new app, and it's not super helpful because I don't know the name of it, but where if there's an older person in your neighborhood, like, they can be marked to say, hey, like, I need something. You're going to the store, you can help them get something. So washing your hands and protecting your family, keeping your kids, you know, in your yard, and I think that's a great place to start.
Okay, friends, you heard it from Nurse Amy. She says stay home, even if Trump hasn't figured it out. I feel like Amy, being on the front lines here, has given us some wise words, and, you know, I'm taking that in for myself and my family, and I hope other people do too.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm good to be with you. You definitely have a lot of maturity and grounding and force and power in what you say, and are able to handle a myriad of things. And you're the type of person I want taking care of people in the medical system, and I don't want to burn you out. So folks, let's stay home.
Thanks, Danielle. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you for being with us.
Love you guys. Thanks for having me.
Oh,